and it's unreasonable from a reasonable person test. So would a reasonable person think this was unreasonable, and what isn't reasonable? I say no, but you know, would it pass the pub test? Would it the average person think, you know, that's really not a reasonable way to treat someone? So it's a reasonable person test. It's by individuals at work, and that's a critical aspect. It has to be at work. But at work is broader than a lot of people think. So if the toll transport delivery guy walks in and makes a harassing comment to the receptionist, that's bullying if it's repeated. Even though the toll transport guy, and I'm not picking on toll, would be anyone, isn't working for the particular company. So all you need is a workplace that is a proprietary limited company or a constitutionally covered business, and you've got the environment for bullying. A body corporate scheme in a building. Most of the building managers are proprietary limited companies, so everywhere they go in a building is their workplace. So if the manager of the body corporate committee is rude to the building manager, that can be bullying in the workplace because it's their workplace. So you have to think of it, the woman in the tuck shop is in a business, because a school, most private schools are businesses, they would pass the business test. So it's quite broad, and it surprises a lot of people how broad it is. So the behaviour has to be repeated. A one-off incident won't be bullying. It has to be behaviour that could reasonably impact on a person's health and safety, and what it can't be is reasonable management action taken in a reasonable way. You come in, we're going to have a discussion about your performance in the workplace is not bullying if it's done reasonably, but if it's done to victimise someone, it can be. So it's a difficult concept to define, but I think, you know, remembering it has to be repeated, it has to be something that's not reasonable, and it has to be, before the Fair Work Commission has any jurisdiction, it has to be likely to continue into the future. So if the person who's the perpetrator has left the workplace, then we have no jurisdiction to deal with it, and particularly it can't be a one-off incident. So,
thank you. I had no idea that it had to be repeated. So there's no idea. Also, we will take that out to the audience as well, and you have sort of burning questions and whatever came up on the poll as well. So, might ask Tina, what are the first steps you should take if you notice signs of bullying?
As in being bullied yourself, or potentially with other people, or both? Maybe both. Report your kids. Okay, sure. So I think if either you are feeling like you might be bullied, and based on that definition, or as Ingrid said, more broadly around just feeling uncomfortable in the workplace, whether it's bullying or not, then I think being able to address that. I always talk to people in training around bullying, harassment, or generally discussions around addressing things as quickly as possible. As small of an issue as possible is much easier to deal with than when people bring a whole folio of things that have gone on for the last 6-12 months that have been happening to them. It's much bigger, as you said earlier, they're potentially much more fragile at that point. So if you notice something and you're like, hey, I don't really feel okay about this, if it's happening to you or if it's happening to somebody else, speak to somebody. But we were saying earlier that might not always be a HR person, it might not always be a manager or the owner of the business or kind of up the chain. That might be a close friend or another senior member of your team that you feel comfortable with, to be able to say to them, hey, this is happening to me, I don't feel okay about it, what do you think I should do? I think it is most appropriate to do that with somebody that has some management experience or is somebody that might have come across this kind of thing before, because they might be able to help you a little bit more from a less emotional perspective than one of your buddies, to be able to kind of get in and be like, oh, that is awful, and kind of catastrophize it. But definitely, as soon as something happens that you're not comfortable with, talk about it with someone and get some support, because that's going to make it much easier to deal with at that small point than to wait for it to kind of manifest. So if it's one-off at the moment, let's deal with it then. let's not wait until it's repeated and it falls into the kind of bullying category. But if it's happened a couple of times, then yeah, let's get back to it straight away.
So what do I do when I work for a small business and my company doesn't have a HR department? You hear this last year. This is a tricky one, and luckily I did get to pre-see that one, so I was a little bit prepared. It is hard. I think, again, if there's somebody else senior in your organisation that you trust, again, I think the second part of that question was around if it's your boss, and we saw a lot of people earlier, it was their boss that was potentially having that bullying behaviour towards you. If it was your boss and you're not comfortable to be able to address that with them directly, and you don't have a HR department, then being able to talk to somebody else senior within your business. If there isn't anyone else, because you're in that small of a team that is the only manager, then I would look to reach out to other support networks that you do have, whether that's a friend that might be in HR or might be a manager at a different business that might have some experience, or to reach out to HR consultants. So Google HR consultants, have a look, contact one of them and say, look, I've got a question. I know it's probably not what you actually do, because obviously mostly HR consultants are working with businesses. Most HR consultants would be able to provide some kind of advice around what you might be able to do. Failing that, obviously contacting Fair Work, but reaching out to your support network to be able to find people to be able to kind of get behind you and be in your corner. Again, people that have that management experience, so that they're not necessarily coming from it from a perspective of, yeah, you deserve better, let's fight them. But to kind of be able to say, look, let's see how we could realistically approach this within the workplace, and kind of break it down for you and be able to see what you might be able to do. And you might be able to have that external person come into a meeting with your boss or the owner of the business if it is quite small, and be able to have someone there just to be with you. Might make you a bit more confident to be able to have that discussion in your workplace. Awesome. Thank you. That was great. All right, Jen, we might move on to you. I'm going to ask you kind of two questions. First of all, I want to know if you've sort of experienced bullying within the workplace, maybe not yourself, but you've witnessed it, sort of how that's all panned out. And then what steps do you take, or would you recommend employees or leaders can take to promote an anti-bullying culture in their office? Because I know Ellie has a great culture. Should be able to answer this one. Just your experience of bullying and then
Okay, so in the 21 years that we've been in business, I have to say that we haven't had any formal complaints of bullying in our workplace. I always believe prevention is better than cure, and we try and have a culture where there's a lot of open conversation, a lot of transparency, a lot of communication. And I think when we go to employ our staff, we do a lot of work with them when they come into the company to work out their communication style, which we have learned through What's Next, actually, where we do what we call a DISC profile of staff to see how they communicate, because we all communicate quite differently. So that when people are different, it's not because they're being difficult or what have you, it's because they process information differently, they communicate differently. So sometimes I feel that helps to understand people a little more, so that when they come into a workplace, you're sort of breaking down those barriers that may become apparent, I suppose, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then the second, as part of culture, so culture is a number one priority for us at the Lido, and always has been. The directors, that's why they started the company, because they wanted to work in a place that was fun, that was going to be a good place to work. And I think what they started with 21 years ago is how they still feel today. And I hope and believe that our staff believe that as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, Elena, I'm going to ask you, when is it friendship and when is it discrimination? For example, Althea's example earlier, going to lunch with selected people and leaving others out. For instance. everyone.
It's a friendship versus discrimination. Gosh, I guess it's a bit hard to say because sometimes those lines become so blurred that it's very difficult to work out. I guess my experiences come from really big global consultancies right through to smaller practices and mid-sized businesses, and I think the smaller the business, sometimes the easier it is to see who is a friend, who is an ally, who is maybe not an ally, and how you manage those situations. But I guess the easiest way that I could probably explain what I've seen is that you will naturally know who in the business you can trust. You go there every day, you see these people more than you see anybody else in your life, and if there's not someone in your business that you feel like you could speak to, there's probably something in your life that you could, just to get some guidance. But who is a friend? Sorry, what's the question? Who is a friend?
Yeah, and when is it discrimination?
And when is it
So
discrimination?
you're excluding people.
To be honest, I've seen a lot of that, and I think it's really prevalent because it's so subtle, like the conversations that you were having earlier. It's the little things: who comes to lunch, who gets invited to a meeting, oh, we left you off the list, or you can invite others if you like, but you actually weren't on the list. And I guess the way to identify it best is to, I honestly think it's to go with your gut, and if it's repeated and there's sort of a cynicism or a sarcasticness about it and it just seems unusual, you'll identify those things, and I would say to call it out. And that's something I didn't do for a really long time. I've seen bullying. I've been in offices where there's a lot of bullying around me. There's bullying of my staff, there's bullying of myself, and I wouldn't call it out until probably realistically the last 5 years because of all those things that you all wrote up on the board about the repercussions. And it would even be everyone going to lunch and leaving me out or leaving out one of my staff members, and I still wouldn't put my hand up. And I think it takes a strength of character, and don't be embarrassed if you've seen it and you haven't called it out. Just know that you will get to a point where you're strong enough to believe in yourself that you will say, hey guys, what's the deal? You're just not inviting me to lunch? That's a bit weird. You know, you can do it and sort of, I think, take things casually until they have to escalate, and just call it. And then if that doesn't work and it happens again, then maybe say, do you also think that's weird? Like, what's that about? They're still not inviting you to lunch. And then if that doesn't work, then you speak to someone. And if that doesn't work, then you speak to management. If that doesn't work, so escalate up through the hierarchies is probably what I've seen being most successful. But if you can, if you're brave enough, you get those like tremor moments on me, like, I'm going to say something, and then you don't. And the next time, one day you will, and you just be like, what? You know, that's not cool, don't do that. And they don't expect you to call it out, so you'll probably gain a lot better.
I guess that's that whole repetition piece as well, which we were talking about earlier, where if it's happening again and again, it gets a bit easier to, or not easier necessarily, but you can call it out, I suppose, because it's becoming more obvious. I might ask you another one because that was hard. I don't know how I'm going to answer that. So, should you leave your job rather than go through the stress of higher action, for example, Fair Work, as this may result in losing a reference from that employer or limit future opportunities? What should you do?
I think it's incredibly individual. Every single situation is so personal, and oh my god, I've had so many people come and see me and say, what do you think I should do? And I've tried my best to use my best judgment and say, okay, to be honest, how long have you been here? I know that it shouldn't come into this. How long have you been here? How comfortable do you feel about saying something? If you don't feel comfortable about saying something, I'm not going to be like, you should do something about it. If you don't want to do it and you don't want anybody else to speak for you, I mean, what do you do? So many people who have come to see me about HR problems have said, please don't tell anyone and please don't do anything on my behalf, which is a really difficult position to be in, and I'm sure that you could respond to this much better than I could. But you get stuck in an ethical situation, how best do you advise what you should do? It's so individual. I would love to say, just go, I'm out, or I'm going to stay here and I'm going to deal with this, and it'll be what it'll be. it's not that easy. It's not that straightforward. And it depends on the degree and the severity of the situation that you're in. Sometimes bullying is putting people in positions where we end up with things like suicide rates going up. Like, some people are so badly bullied that we have terrible repercussions, and sometimes, because it's so subjective, sometimes it can actually be quite minor, but it makes a person feel uncomfortable. So I don't think there's a generic response to it. And hopefully you're in a workplace where you do have HR, and I think even a really small workplace should have HR or someone that's recognised as being the person that you can go to and try and deal with it as it happens. But it's an impossible thing to give a generic answer to, as I say.
Okay, I've got a few more questions, but I'm going to throw one more out to the panel, and anyone can answer it, and then I might take some from the audience before I ask the rest of mine. Yeah. So, I want to ask. Oh, I found it before and I just lost it. Oh yeah, where is the line between a strong leader and being a bully? Who wants to take the reins? I'm looking.
I think, as I would hope, a good leader would be able to tell when their team is not taking their strength as I'm strong, we're leading us forward, and I'm strong and I'm making everyone feel uncomfortable. That's not always the case. I think, as Jen said before, tools like DISC, which is a behavioural profiling tool, which essentially gives people some insight into how people might be different, and gives people a bit of insight into how other people in their team might be different to them and how they might be thinking and feeling about certain situations. Those kind of situations help, or those tools help to say, okay, well, if that strong leader is very direct and task focused and looking at the results that we need to achieve, and not being so worried about the fact that I broke up with my boyfriend and I'm feeling really sad about it, I just want to kind of sit and wallow for a little bit. They're not kind of getting concerned about that because that's not their focus. There's things like that that can come into play for people to understand other people a bit better. The line, I suppose, again, is how Ingrid was saying before, between where it becomes reasonable management action is around performance managing somebody or having high expectations of somebody within your team. And then when that flips over to being unreasonable, again, it's, as Ingrid was saying, quite subjective around where that line is between reasonable and unreasonable, unfortunately. But it's things like setting unreasonable expectations that someone could never expect to achieve, or being able to, load somebody up with so much work that they're not able to complete anything. So those kind of things, I guess, is where it kind of tips from being having high expectations of being a strong leader and having a high performing team, to then flipping to not being supportive. I think it's that you can be strong and lead and push your team and get a lot of results out of them, but then having that support that if they fail, that they know that you're there to pick them up at the end of the day, I think is probably where it kind of flips over. Yeah. It's a fine line. It is.
Audience, who has... Oh. Okay, what one's good? Okay, for Ingrid, what is the process to protect me from said bullying if I need to seek help from Fair Work? Sorry.
Okay, I can sit here and tell you that the Fair Work Act protects you from adverse action, from any form of being treated badly because you make a workplace complaint or you exercise a workplace right. And that's what the law says. And the law presumes if you are treated adversely, so all you have to do is assert, I made a workplace complaint, I filed a complaint with the Fair Work Commission about workplace bullying, or it could even be I went to my supervisor and I complained about workplace bullying or asked a question about it, and then all of a sudden these things happen to me. The onus then switches to the other party who has to prove that was not the reason for the adverse action that was taken against you. So there are protections in the legislation. It's difficult though when you are there on the pointy end of the stick having to make a a claim, and I know that. And the downside is the Commission, if there is a hearing, generally we try to anonymise things, keep bullying matters anonymous, but there can be ways of identifying who parties are. But the legislation does protect you, and if you make a complaint, the Commission deals with it pretty quickly. So within 14 days, we are required to do something. That might be send a letter to your employer and say this person's made a complaint, this is the person they've complained about. If you tell us I am at risk of harming myself because I'm being bullied at work, we will do it immediately. So we will immediately contact you and speak to you, and there's a triage process that we put applications through, and we tell you things like, now this is what will happen. If you make this application, this is how we will deal with it, this is what you will need to do, this is what we will tell the employer, we'll handle it in this way, you'll have to come to a conference. The form that you fill in gives you pointers about what, so you've got to say, this is the example I'm giving of bullying, this is when it happened, this is who was involved, and you have to name the parties. So the form that we have actually is quite intuitive because it makes you think about, is this bullying or not? And the first thing we tell you is the one thing you cannot get out of this exercise is money. The Act specifically says we cannot make pecuniary awards. All we can do is make orders. So person A will not interact with person B unless by email or unless in the presence of person C. We can make orders about how people will engage with each other. We can, and my view from spending a lot of my life before my time with the Fair Work Commission advising employers was have a policy. I don't care how small you are, I just think in the current year 2019, if you don't have a policy to deal with bullying and harassment, then you're just really quite negligent in the way that you're managing your business. It doesn't matter how big or small you are, you should have a policy. They're easy to get. Go online, Google, there's plenty of departments, government departments, WorkSafe, the State Department of Workplace Health and Safety who have model policies. Get one. So people know what they have to do, and if you're a person who's being bullied, think about what it is that I'm alleging is bullying and what I'm going to be asking the Fair Work Commission to do. I want an order that says I don't have to be spoken to like that by this person. I want an order that says he's not allowed to email me at 11 o'clock at night and demand I do something. I want an order. You've got to be quite specific, and it is difficult, but if you put your mind to what is the conduct that I'm, and it can't be telling not to look at me out of the corner. I've had ones like that, and you think, I don't know that I can really, but the first order that was ever made is quite, I think, illustrative of how the Commission works. Person A and person B were in a relationship, they broke up, it was bitter, very bitter, and they were in the same workplace. And he, I don't know why, wanting her to see, I guess, what she was missing out on, would come to work very early, take off his shirt and do his exercises right in front of where she was trying to have her breakfast and whatever. So he got one of my colleagues who's now retired, but she has 5 children, 3 boys, 2 girls. She's used to slapping people around, and she said he will leave his shirt on. He will not come to work before 8 a.m. and at all times he will have his shirt on. It's simple. And it was, that sounds trivial, but to her that was bullying. It was offensive. She didn't like it. So we try to be very practical with this jurisdiction and get right down to what are you asking us to do. And so if you come into the Commission as an applicant, you need to tell us that. You need to be able to tell us that. And as an employer, you need to have a solution. You need to be coming to the Commission saying, we had no idea that this was going on. We have a policy. Our employee may not be aware of it, but here is the policy, and we'd like an opportunity to try and deal with this. And we will let you do that. I don't want to come to your workplace and tell you to put your shirt on. I want you to acknowledge there is an issue. I've read what she has to say. It's unfortunate that the applicant didn't know we have a policy. Here is our policy, and we would like to try and deal with it, and we promise you we will. And I will say to you, go away, take a month, talk about this, and I'll say to the applicant, if you are concerned at any minute that this is not going the way you want it, let me know. I'll call you all back in here. But most things we resolve. So the cases that don't get settled at a conciliation, mediation stage are very few. So fearing it is one thing, but I think we do get outcomes, and it is positive in those cases. So hopefully, the only way that you're going to address it is to do something about it.
So we have a lot of questions up here, so I'm thinking I'll ask a few more, but any remaining, we want to try and answer them, so maybe we'll get us panel members over the next few days to formulate some responses, and we'll send it out in our thank you email so everyone can have a read through. So what am I asking instead? Oh yeah, what to do if you raise concerns and are being told it's a construction industry and just to toughen up? Who wants this one? Jen? No?
Well, I suppose what to do.
Yeah.
Again, I think what you have to do, if you're that person that's been told to toughen up, I suppose you might want to think about what is it that you're doing or saying or feeling as to why someone feels that you're not tough enough. So, you need to communicate back to say, well, how is it that I need to change my behaviour? How am I responding in a situation that person doesn't feel that they're being working in a way that is satisfactory to both parties, I suppose. So, we take the approach that you need to have an opportunity to be able to say if there's a problem. And, our office, when we induct our staff, we say to them, if you have a problem, you need to talk to somebody, tell somebody. We have lots of opportunities where people get together to talk about how things are going. So it's hard for me to imagine being on that other side, having not been in that position where anyone's ever told me you've got to toughen up. And I suppose it depends on the situation. Like, are they being told to toughen up because are they crying at work? And what made them cry? So, and you need to also communicate back to say, well, this is not a situation in which I feel comfortable about. I need some support in learning how it is that I need to do whatever it is that I'm doing. So again, I think it's communication, and sometimes perhaps the other party don't even know how it is that they're responding. They don't even realise that the way they're speaking is being taken by offence. So when someone says, "Oh, toughen up," they might not be being terribly mean about it. They're just thinking, "Oh, come on, get on with the job." But the other person might be taking that in a really harsh way. So it's understanding what the expectations are.
Yep. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so I worked for a local interior design studio where the turnover in junior staff is faster than a speeding bullet. It's due to the horrific treatment from the owner who is a known bully in the industry. I want to warn other students and graduates who wouldn't be aware of this and save them the trauma that myself and so many have already been through. How can I do this without bad-mouthing or slandering the company or owning the process?
Yeah, this one's a pretty familiar one for me, sadly enough. To be honest, I would actually say, don't worry about it. Like, if you've had a bad experience, and you know that a lot of people are having bad experiences, you don't have to get down to the nitty-gritty and be like, these are all the details of all the terrible stuff that happened while I was there. But you can say, you know, I've heard that place isn't great, or when I was here I didn't actually have a very good experience. I had a few friends that had the same experience. Until some point at which everybody becomes aware of what's happening, it's almost like the Me Too situation. Until we start talking about it and start saying this thing is happening, if everybody in the industry already knows that this particular workplace is renowned for bullying, somebody hopefully will speak to Fair Work and hopefully they will do something about that. But we have to talk about it. And once you've left that organisation, there's actually nothing restricting you or inhibiting you to speak in confidence and comfort with those people around you about your experience.
Just to add to that, so this is actually one where I feel like this is a situation where 3 separate people who I know in this situation, in this particular company, and I know who it is. Can those people, and I guess the question was raised, can those people form a civil suit of sorts and actually report the company? So the person is the business owner and the bully, that's the problem. And there is no one under, and there is no HR consultant, there's no external consultant, there's nothing. And 3 of them have all been bullied by her and just been fired and forced to leave. They've asked, should we all band together and go to Fair Work? And is there a process through Fair Work where she can be red flagged because it's been ongoing for years?
I think that's the best question I've heard all night, because I would love to know the answer to that too, because I often wonder that myself.
Unfortunately, you need an employment relationship. You need to be a worker or to be in an employment relationship. If someone still there takes an application, you can be a witness. You can come and give evidence about it happened to me, and that happens quite frequently. But the system doesn't deal with that. But you might have other conduct. So, for example, the Department of Workplace Health and Safety can do an investigation regardless of whether someone's still employed or not. So if 3 people went to them and said, we were bullied and this is what happened, they can do an investigation. But we can't, we're not inquisitorial. We can't go out and say, oh, we've had 3 applicants all from the same place, so we're going to go for them, you know, as much as we like to.
Had said that they had been bullied, and then they have this person standing behind them saying, that's it, she's useless, I'm going to sack her. So they knew it was pending.
Yeah.
If they got their claim into you guys that day, and then they got fired, does that mean that
it would become a different claim? Because again, once you've been fired, there's no danger that you're going to. There will be an argument if you got reinstated, but you have to have made an unfair dismissal application and got reinstated. So at that point, I think it would become an unfair dismissal application. And even if you resign, if you're forced to resign by a course of conduct that gives you no option but to resign, then that can be a dismissal.
is that Fair Work as well?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, we've got it all. Yeah, we've got it all. It's a different area. It's the same tribunal we all deal with.
But it's not on bullying, it's then unfair.
It can mix. So people can say I was bullied. So someone says I was unfairly dismissed, and an employer turns up and says, well, we gave 3 warnings, this, and the employee says, but I made a complaint about this person bullying me, and all of that can be taken into account in an unfair dismissal claim. But it stops when the employment stops, unfortunately.
Red one, great. Anonymous? Okay. What was a good one? We'll answer them all, send them out. This one? Okay. I've been bullied by the principal of the firm. He wants me fired or to leave, or I leave. I don't know. Practice directors know and say they fight to keep me, but I'm on a list to be made redundant. What are my rights? Maybe Christina.
So I think
it's probably a similar situation-ish, in that if this person then was made redundant and they had reason to believe that it wasn't a genuine redundancy, then it would be an unfair dismissal, and the other considerations could be taken into that unfair dismissal case, is my understanding. Yeah. So I guess the action that they could take at this point is obviously to escalate that complaint, and probably if I was advising this individual in that situation, I would say to make a formal complaint within the business, because as Ingrid said earlier, having made that complaint then adds extra protections on to you as an employee in terms of being able to be terminated for making a complaint. You can still be terminated, but just not for that specific reason. So I would definitely, again, be communicating, talking to people, raising that issue and making that people aware. And if they did become redundant, then looking at options around avenues to see if that was a genuine redundancy. And there are situations where somebody might be in that situation and then it is a genuine redundancy still, so there's unfortunately a lot of grey area and different things to consider. But yeah, we kind of go into that unfair dismissal, and then bullying might be a factor within that consideration or investigation process.
Also, can I ask a question? With a redundancy, because this hasn't always been my industry, is there a payout package for the redundancy as opposed to being defined?
Yes, depends. Yeah, so if you're made redundant and you have past 12 months and you're in a business that has more than 15 employees, then there would be the legislated redundancy payout. Or depending on your award. So that's something that you can look up on the Fair Work website and have a look into that. But yeah, so being terminated is then different to a redundancy from that perspective.
So just to clarify that point, even though just to clarify that point there, so Fair Work Australia only deals with this sort of stuff when someone's on their own board. So if someone's on the executive salary, it doesn't apply.
So unfair dismissal is not an option for people that are on a salary of over 145,000 this financial year. So that is then it would be a different situation than if your salary was higher than that. Unfair dismissal wouldn't be an option. But there is then potentially civil options if it was a bullying case, or if there was an adverse action against you, or a workplace right was taken from you.
Why is that? Why does that have a salary cap?
We can take that.
That's what the legislation says. There's a salary cap on making an offence claim, unless you're covered by an award that's higher, and some are like the pilots awards or something like that, but generally there's a salary cap, and people who've been dismissed and want to take action have to take a civil claim if they're above the salary cap. You have to ask the government who put that salary cap in, but it just is there in the legislation.
Do we want one more question, or we keep?
I was just going to ask, maybe from a personal note, from our speakers, if you're happy to share, maybe your experience if you've been bullied or witnessed bullying, what would be sort of your advice, or one piece of advice to people in the room?
I think, I hope I've been fairly consistent in my answering of questions, but I would definitely encourage people to speak up as early as possible. It's definitely something that's much easier to deal with when it's a smaller issue. So if it's something that's happened 1 or 2 times and it's just like, oh, this doesn't really seem right, I'm not really okay with it, deal with it then. Then when you get to the point which I've seen people come into an office and they've got a whole reams of paper of things that have happened and they're crying and they're very fragile, as you said before, that's not the place that you want to be in when you're then going through a process of investigation and having to bring these issues forward. So it's much easier to deal with when it's smaller.
you're then in a position where you can go to speak to the other person if you're comfortable, or have that mediated to be able to deal with it as a much smaller thing. And I think, as Jen said earlier, it's possible that the person didn't even realise that that was behaviour that was making you feel uncomfortable, and it might just be able to stop right there. And something that's happened once or twice and then doesn't have to happen again. So I think getting in early and getting it dealt with, and then talking to somebody about it. And I think we're getting into a kind of a society now where it's much more acceptable to be talking about these things and be bringing things up. I imagine the construction industry is still a pretty tough one to be bringing these kind of things forward, but it is much more common. So I think getting it out there and having somebody to talk to about it, to get it dealt with quickly, is definitely my number one piece of advice. We might go down the line.
I would say go back to work and take a proactive approach and say, do we have a policy on these things, and what is it? And I'd like to know what it is. And I went to a seminar last night and it was really interesting. And do you know that, or I've done some research about this and it doesn't seem like we have a policy, and here's a model policy, and why don't we have one? And wouldn't it be a good idea if we did? So rather than waiting for something to happen, to take a more proactive approach in workplaces and talk about what would we do? What would we do if something like this happened? And sit around like you had tonight and discuss it. What do we think about this? Because the reason that bullying legislation came into play was because there was a survey where I think it was 6 out of 10 people said, I have been bullied at work. It was a phenomenal amount, and it was above the OECD average, and the government of the day said, we have to do something, so we're going to enact this legislative regime. And one thing that it's done, I think, is give people the terms to use to articulate what's happening and what it is, and so use them and talk about it before something happens. I think that would be the advice I'd give, or else take really good notes.
Come and work at Lever. So, pretty much what Katina was saying, I just think communication is the key. You need to try and understand how other people are thinking, I think, because some people don't even know what it is that they're saying is offending somebody, particularly around joking, making fun of people can sometimes be construed as bullying, and other people may not even think that that is either, because they think it's funny, but somebody who is a lot more sensitive may then take offence at that. But then again, if you don't let people know how you're feeling, then how can anybody help you? So I think you need to be open, you need to tell people how you're feeling, and try and deal with it in a sensible, common sense kind of way.
I guess my takeaway message to give you guys would be a very human legal message, which is just be kind to yourself, because when you're in these situations, or when you witness these situations, you walk away, you walk back to your desk, or you go home and you fret about it and you go, shit, should I have done something? I've just seen this thing and I haven't done anything, and you worry about it and you go over and over it, or if it's happening to you, you go home, you cry about it, you fret about it. But be kind to yourself, because most of the time in these situations, people are terrified, you'll be terrified, you won't know what to do, you won't know how to help people, and it's okay, you will actually get through it, and you will help whoever you're trying to help through it. And as a part of it, you just have to try and be brave and encourage the people that you're trying to support who are in those situations to be brave and help them speak up. But protect yourself and know that none of these situations are easy. Anyone dealing with them is struggling. And that's okay.
Big round of applause.
Just to add to that, I'd say, I don't know, it would have been great to have a psychologist or something up here as well to understand the behaviours of of bullies and why they act in that way as well, because I think what you're saying is don't fret about it and try not to dwell on it too much, and often it is an issue within themselves, and if you can kind of remove yourself from that and understand why they're acting in that way, there's lots of psychology and research around their behaviours, and often if you can almost not give them the benefit of the doubt in the sense where you don't act on it, but I mean just remove yourself and don't take it personally, because often it is them taking out their feelings and their situation on you or on their behaviours. But I don't know if that's kind of my takeaway as well. But yeah, thank you. A round of applause for our Megan Parnham.